Welcome to the concluding part of the silver chair portion of the Way of the Lion Narnian Apologetics course. So far we have considered the worldly spell woven to enslave and a possible way to break it. This time we consider what it means to live like a Narnian. Our learning aims for this session are to consider what it means to live like a Narnian, to examine 7 Christian virtues from both sides of the wardrobe door, and to discuss apologetic application. But I'm going to start with a literature review. Books which are really helpful in this field include Richard Wagner's C.S. Lewis and Narnia for Dummies, like me, especially Part 2, Chapter 9, Faith and Discipleship in Narnia. The Chronicles of Narnia and Philosophy, with the catchy subtitle The Lion, the Witch and the World View, edited by Basham and Walls. And Live Like a Narnian, Christian Discipleship in Lewis's Chronicles, by Joe Rigney, which I recently got as an early Father's Day present, and I wish I had had when I was writing my dissertation, because it's saying many of the same things that I'm saying here. But the text I will mainly be drawing on will be Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, and of course the Chronicles themselves. So starting with those Chronicles, going straight into the silver chair, Puddleglum finishes his refutation of the Queen of Underland's attack with the powerful line, I quote, "I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia." What did Puddleglum mean? Lewis is at pains to point out in essays and letters that Narnia is a suppositional world. Though it may not exist in any scientifically testable way, that does not equate to it not being real in some deeper sense. As far as it relates to the Christian experience, it is a very real construct, and living as a Narnian has some definable attributes we can discuss. In Book 3 of Mere Christianity, Christian Behaviour, Lewis discusses 4 cardinal virtues, prudence, temperance, justice and fortitude, and the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope and charity. We can find examples of these in the text of the Silver Chair and the other Chronicles and the Bible, and apply them to our own lives as well as ways to live like a Narnian. Starting with prudence. Lewis characterises prudence as common sense. He believes that we have a responsibility to use every ounce of intellect God bestowed upon us. How apt that in a book which speaks of being at the threshold to thinking life, we find directions from Aslan himself to put childish things behind us. I quote from Chapter 2, Jill is given a task. "Human child," said the lion, "where is the boy?" He fell over the cliff," said Jill, and added, "Sir." She didn't know what else to call him, and it sounded cheap to call him nothing. "How did he come to do that, human child?" He was trying to stop me from falling, sir." "Why were you so near the edge, human child?" "I was showing off, sir." "That is a very good answer, human child. Do so no more." End quote. The Christian common sense may be different to the common sense of common sense, if you see what I mean. Lewis outlines this in a paper he wrote in the same year as Silver Chair called On Obstinacy of Belief, found in The World's Last Night. Since we have a worldview which allows for, accepts and relies on the existence and immanence of God, that ultimate reality must colour all of our decision-making processes. This method of letting our ultimate reality pervade our entire lives will serve as a profound witness to the world on this side of the school's garden door. Temperance. When Lewis was writing, the word temperance had a definite meaning related to abstinence from alcohol. Lewis both smoked and drank as a matter of course. Though the Eagle and Child is the best known of their haunts, there are few pubs in Oxford which he and his fellow Inklings didn't frequent. The holiness movement of Wesley's Christchurch certainly didn't survive up Rose Lane in 1950s Magdalen. Puddleglum partakes of an intoxicating beverage at Harfang while advising the children against it, which he next morning claims was mostly a ruse. But one of the clearest pictures of intoxication and losing one's self-control to the magic of a woman is the enchantment of Rilian. Like Spenser's Knight of Temperance, Sir Guyon, in The Fairy Queen, he is enchanted with the help of a silver chair. The enchanted Rilian is pictured with red wine on his table, and his behaviour was consistent with a drunken fool, leading Jill to wonder if he was a bit silly. But when the hour of sanity and clarity came to him, he became a very different person, knowing all about Narnia and himself as prince thereof. To Lewis, temperance is taking things in moderation and not letting worldly things take precedence over your God-given free will. He was very much alive to this danger due to his brother, Warnie's, alcoholism, which he writes of in some of his letters. For us, as followers of the true Aslan, it is vital that we don't let worldly desires and addictions replace our first love, as the church at Ephesus is accused of in Revelation 2:4. I would go so far as to suggest that this includes not being overcome by worldly smoke and strumming, and sticking fast to sola scriptura. Justice. Puddleglum believes in fate, but also in the goodness of Aslan. When Jill suddenly escapes first from Underland, the others think the worst. I quote from chapter 15, The Disappearance of Jill. "Why the dickens couldn't you have held her feet?" said Eustace. "Oh, you don't know, Scrub," groaned Puddleglum. "Born to be a misfit, I shouldn't wonder. Fated to be pulled to death, just as I was fated to eat talking stag at Harfang. Not that it isn't my own fault as well, of course." End quote. It is significant that he links this calamity to another calamitous event, the eating of the talking stag at Harfang, as if this was just retribution for an event which he felt had brought the curse of Aslan. I quote from chapter 9, How They Learned Something Worth Knowing. So we've been eating a talking stag? This discovery didn't have exactly the same effect on all of them. Jill, who was new to that world, was sorry for the poor stag and thought it rotten of the giants to have killed him. Scrub, who had been in that world before and had at least one talking beast as his dear friend, felt horrified, as you might feel about a murder. But Puddleglum, who was Narnian born, was sick and faint, and felt as you would feel if you found you had eaten a baby. "We brought the anger of Aslan on us," he said. "That's what comes of not attending to the signs. We're under a curse, I expect. If it was allowed, it would be the best thing we could do to take these knives and drive them into our own hearts." End quote. I think my favourite enacting of justice in the Silver Chair is the execution of the Snake Woman. I quote from chapter 12, The Queen of Underland. "My royal mother is avenged," said Rilian presently. "This is undoubtedly the same worm that I pursued in vain by the fountains in the forest of Narnia. so many years ago. All these years I've been the slave of my mother's slayer. Yet I am glad, gentlemen, that the foul witch took to her serpent form at the last. It would not have suited well, either with my heart or with my honour, to have slain a woman." End quote. Honour is a recurring theme in Narnia and is closely linked to justice. I repeat a quote I used in an earlier video from Of Other Worlds, Essays and Stories on 3 Ways of Writing for Children. Since it is so likely that children will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Otherwise, you are making their destiny not brighter, but darker. As Aslannian apologists, we can both tell of Christ's heroic courage and just honour, as well as model it by our own and other Christian example. I don't advocate killing people, unless they have just turned into a snake and are trying to kill you, but I do hold that Christian forgiveness does not preclude just judgment. Fortitude. Yet another quote from Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 2, Cardinal Virtues. Fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger, as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play. End quote. There are many examples of courage in the Silver Chair, from Eustace and Jill facing their opposite fears of heights and depths, to Puddleglum's stalwart perseverance despite expecting the worst possible outcome. But one of the clearest is from the Unenchanted Prince. After killing the Snake Queen, Rilian leads the party on the next phase of their adventure. His attitude is displayed in this quote from Chapter 13, Underland Without the Queen. "Friends," said the prince, "when once a man is launched on such an adventure as this, he must bid farewell to hopes and fears. Otherwise death or deliverance will both come too late to save his honour and his reason." End quote. Here he echoes the martyred Christian missionary Jim Elliot, who said, "Wherever you are, be all there. Live to the hilt every situation you believe to be the will of God." Lewis rephrased his description of courage in Screwtape Letters number 29. I quote, "In peace we can make many of them ignore good and evil entirely. In danger, the issue is forced upon them in a guise to which even we cannot blind them. Here is a cruel dilemma before us. If we promoted justice and charity among men, we should be playing directly into the enemy's hands. But if we guide them to the opposite behaviour, this sooner or later produces, for he permits it to produce, a war or a revolution, and the undisguisable issue of cowardice or courage awakes thousands of men from moral stupor. This is indeed probably one of the enemy's motives for creating a dangerous world, a world in which moral issues really come to the point. He sees as well as you do that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality." End quote. In this dangerous world we live and work in, our virtues will frequently be put to the test. And that is when we can display the fortitude that comes from knowing that we are on the victorious side. Indeed, that we are more than conquerors, since Christ himself has won the victory, and we are standing in the reward of that achievement. All we have to do, as evangelists and apologists, is invite others to share in the reward with us. Faith. In Mere Christianity, Lewis identifies three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. He defines faith in two ways. First, faith and reason, as opposed to emotion and imagination. And second, trust, displayed in actions. The two faith-filled scenes are Jill at Aslan's stream and the freeing of the lunatic who proved to be Prince Rilian. In Chapter 2, Jill is offered a drink from the only stream on Aslan's mountain, but fear holds her back. In order to quench her thirst, and indeed to survive, she had to trust the lion not to eat her, something he gives her no assurance of. She had to decide without evidence, at the risk of death by dehydration. If we view the stream as a path to truth, since Aslan assures her here that there is no other stream, this scene becomes profound and applicable. William James wrote in The Will to Believe, "A rule to thinking which would prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth, if those truths were really there, would be an irrational rule." Drinking was a live hypothesis, as was not drinking, since both could conceivably happen within Jill's will. One had to be chosen. If she adhered to a rule of thinking, not drinking, that would certainly result in her death, rather than risk a potentially dangerous act, drinking in the view of the lion, then it would have been a very short and depressing book. Bringing the God question to be a live hypothesis can shake people out of a stupor to choose a path. By contrast, Rilian's mind had been turned upside down by a decade of inverted Platonic thinking. I quote from Chapter 11, In the Dark Castle. "Oh, have mercy! Let me out! Let me go back! Let me feel the wind and see the sky! There used to be a little pool. When you looked down into it, you could see all the trees growing upside down in the water, all green, and below them, deep, very deep, the blue sky." End quote. I hope you like the picture. I took it myself. They have his own word as to his dangerousness should he get free, but he unwittingly gives the fourth sign, asking for something in Aslan's name. They finally decide, against the evidence, to trust in Aslan's sign. Freud's Bulverism, explaining the greater from the lesser, is like the antithesis of Plato's Forms, explaining the lesser by a greater. From Lewis's perspective, this is upside-down philosophy, to be rejected. In the Bible, prophets are not always immediately revered, and many are put to death or imprisoned for following God's instructions. And yet they continue to follow, because they are not aiming at earth, nor should we. I quote from Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 10, Hope. "Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither." That last quote brings us neatly to the next section, on hope. It is the hope of heaven that motivates Christians to make earth more like it. Examples include Nye Bevan's NHS, William Wilberforce's abolition of slavery, the foundation of both Oxford and Cambridge universities, and St. Paul evangelizing the Roman Empire. Countless others can be identified throughout the ages and around the world, but the unifying factor is a hope for heaven. In Mere Christianity, Lewis offers three ways that people deal with the unrealized hope for heaven: the fool's way, the disillusioned way, and the Christian way. Each is addressed. We find the fool's way in the approach to Harfang, where the children are so focused on worldly things like hot baths and soft beds that they miss the third of Aslan's signs: They later find that those things did not satisfy after all, or not for long, and led them to eat a talking stag and nearly get eaten themselves. The second way is described in Screwtape Letters number 9. I quote, "If he is of the more hopeful type, your job is to make him acquiesce in the present low temperature of his spirit, and gradually become content with it, persuading himself that it is not so low after all. In a week or two, you will be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not perhaps a little excessive." This is something we see the Green Witch tapping into. I quote from chapter 12 again. "Jill couldn't remember the names of things in our world, and this time it didn't come into her head that she was being enchanted, for now the magic was in its full strength, and of course the more enchanted you get, the more certain you feel that you are not enchanted at all. She found herself saying, and at the moment it was a relief to say, 'No, I suppose that other world must be all a dream.'" End quote. Of this approach, Lewis says, "It would be the best line we could take if man did not live forever. But supposing infinite happiness really is there waiting for us, supposing one really can reach the rainbow's end, in that case it would be a pity to find out too late, a moment after death, that by our supposed common sense we had stifled in ourselves the faculty of enjoying it." The last way, the Christian way, was quoted in my last video and was exemplified by Puddleglum's argument from desire. The Mere Christianity quote, slightly abridged, is, "Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Puddleglum's Narnian equivalent was also quoted in full last time, but it's so good it bears repeating, and I do like a lot of quotes. "There's one thing more to be said, even so. Suppose we have only dreamed or made up all those things, trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan himself. Suppose we have. Then all I can say is that in that case the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom of yours is the only world. Well, it strikes me as a pretty poor one. And that's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world which licks your real world hollow. That's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia." End quote. Hooray for Puddleglum. This argument from desire is our ultimate safeguard against those who would seek to rob us of our legitimate joy. It is also a logical and legitimate argument for both the pragmatic and factual value of the Christian worldview. (1 Corinthians 13:13). "And now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." This famous verse, used so often at weddings, is rarely read from the KJV, which translates the Greek agape, charity, rather than love. Without wishing to anger the KJV only lobby, the NIV translation is much better in this regard. It is significant that there is no indication of erotic love in the book. The love Paul means in 1 Corinthians is Christian love. Time for a quote. Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 9, Charity. Christian love, either towards God or towards man, is an affair of the will. If we are trying to do his will, we are obeying the commandment, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God." End quote. Aslan's 4 signs are a running theme throughout the book. Following them requires acts of great faith, trust, and love. Of course, the party fail on two of the signs and nearly muff the third, just as countless new Christians find themselves falling short of Christian expectations early on. Then, almost by accident, they find themselves in a dark pit with no obvious chance of escape. It is then that Puddleglum brings a ray of Aslanic light. I quote from Chapter 10, Travels Without the Sun. "Now don't you let your spirits down, Paul," said the Marshwiggle. "There's one thing you've got to remember. We're back on the right lines. We were to go under the ruined city, and we are under it. We're following the instructions again." End quote. It helps to note that even when we fail, as we all do, God is much more loving to us and can bring us back to him, if only we are open to him. These virtues, cardinal and spiritual, are put to the test at the culmination of the signs. I quote from Chapter 11, The Dark Castle. "Once and for all," said the prisoner, "I adjure you to set me free. By all fears and all loves, by the bright skies of Overland, by the great Lion, by Aslan himself, I charge you." "Oh!" cried the 3 travellers, as though they had been hurt. "It's the sign," said Puddleglum. "It was the words of the sign," said Scrub, more cautiously. "Oh, what are we to do?" said Jill. It was a dreadful question. What had been the use of promising one another that they would not on any account set the knight free, if they were now to do so, the first time he happened to call upon a name they really cared about? On the other hand, what had been the use of learning the signs if they weren't going to obey them? Yet could Aslan really have meant them to unbind anyone, even a lunatic, who asked it in his name? Could it be a mere accident? Or how if the Queen of the Underworld knew all about the signs and had made the knight learn this name simply in order to entrap them? But then, supposing this was the real sign? They had muffed 3 already, they daren't muff the 4th. "Oh, if only we knew," said Jill. "I think we do know," said Puddleglum. "Do you mean you think everything will come right if we do untie him?" said Scrub. "I don't know about that," said Puddleglum. "You see, Aslan didn't tell Pole what would happen. He only told her what to do. That fellow will be the death of us once he's up, I shouldn't wonder. That doesn't let us off following the sign." They all stood looking at one another with bright eyes. It was a sickening moment. "All right," said Jill suddenly. "Let's get it over with. Goodbye, everyone." They all shook hands. The knight was screaming by now. There was foam on his cheeks. "Come on, Scrub," said Puddleglum. He and Scrub drew their swords and went over to the captive. End quote. As we know, they did obey the sign, and it did all come right. But this little scene showed us prudence in assessing the sign, temperance in a desire to break free of an enchantment, justice in doing the right thing, fortitude by being sorely tempted but obeying anyway, faith in that they trusted Aslan enough to follow his sign, hope that they didn't know what would happen, and charity, since they were loving Aslan by obeying his commandment. Apologetic application. Much of this video could be legitimately used as a Bible study or Narnian book club. It could even be rolled into a sermon with little change, which raises the question, is this apologetics? The Great Commission, as found in Matthew 28:16-20, runs as follows. Jesus speaking. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Thank you, Lord. Discipleship is a key part of the apologetic and evangelistic goal. As a church, we should constantly be on our guard against getting people to say the sinner's prayer and leaving them. Discipleship is about helping people to grow to be the best they can be by directing them closer to God. This includes purposefully growing the virtues I have highlighted in this video and nurturing the fruit of the Spirit we discussed earlier in the series. One biblical model of apologetics is found in 1 Peter 2:12. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Most apologists are focused on the later 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But that does not replace or abrogate the earlier command. Perhaps this is what St. Francis of Assisi meant when he said, preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. Okay, he didn't actually say that, but he said things close enough to that is an accurate paraphrase. The exercise for this topic is a discussion. If you are watching this in a group, you can discuss and share ideas, offer advice and tactics. But if you are watching this on your own, I encourage you to write your thoughts in the comments section down below, so that the Way of the Lion community can all benefit. The questions I would like you to consider are: what does this mean to you? What needs to change? What strategies have you found help in this matter? Pause now to meditate, converse, or just get some food and drink. Our learning aims for this session were to consider what it means to live like a Narnian, which we did with examples from the book and other Lewis writings. To examine 7 Christian virtues from both sides of the wardrobe. We found those virtues in Mere Christianity and showed examples from the Silver Chair and beyond. And to discuss apologetic applications, which we did with reference to the individual virtues, and I hope you will do more in the comments section. If we have hit these targets together, then please consider liking this video. And if you would like to be alerted when part 3 becomes available, then please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon. Finally, at the end of each book, I like to set homework that will never be marked. This time I challenge you to find examples of bulverism in the press or conversations and challenge them as we have prepared for. Please share your thoughts, findings, experiences and conversations in the comment section. The next instalment of The Way of the Lion will focus on the horse and his boy, with particular consideration of witnessing to people of other faith groups. Until then, may we all continue to live as Narnians under the true Aslan.